topic of her presentation is the economic diversification of the United Arab Emirates, the role of merchant family businesses.
Okay. Hi everyone, hope you can hear me okay. It's good to speak to you, my home university. With falling oil prices and the cutting sectors in the UAE, diversification has become a very big priority of the UAE government. Since I've been here, there's been lots of changes which have been happening, sort of cutting of subsidies, introduction of corporation VAT. So economic diversification is something which the UAE is very, very interested in at the moment. So while the UAE has to some extent had some success, two-thirds of the economy of the UAE is not oil economy, but most of the government revenue still originates from oil. So there have been impressive shifts, but it hasn't produced the desired independence from oil. So what is economic diversification? Basically, it's a process of shifting from one economic base to another. So shifting from primary resources to secondary resources. So in the UAE, this means shifting from oil to a non-oil economy. So the main argument of my paper is that diversification in the UAE should be a main mechanism in employing the private sector, and specifically merchant families. So the paper will argue that the diversification mechanisms that are employed in the UAE are essentially state-centric, and thus merchant family businesses who have this significant potential to contribute seem unable to because of the integration into the political system and dependence on the ruling elite. So before we go into that, let's look at the UAE's economic development. So oil rents have been are the central element of the UAE's economy, and enable the ruling families, particularly of Abu Dhabi and Dubai, to retain political autonomy in the UAE over not only politics but also economics. And this is encompassed in the ruling bargain. So essentially, the mechanisms for essentially in exchange for distribution of wealth through various channels, including subsidies and many other things, the rulers have complete autonomy over politics, and this political autonomy has extended to the economy and controlling the trajectory of economic development in the UAE. And thus, in this context, the ruling families are able to expand and develop the economy independent of the private sector. So I'm going to quickly look at the mechanisms the UAE has employed for economic diversification to show that essentially these mechanisms have been state-led with very little intervention by the private sector. So the first and most important mechanism is sovereign wealth funds. The UAE has the second largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, which is Arabia, and in total, the sovereign wealth funds of the UAE exceed $1 trillion US. And essentially, for Arabia, which is the main sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, according to its annual report, is to invest funds on behalf of the government of the Emirates and make available the necessary financial resources to secure and maintain the future welfare of the Emirates. So this shows how state-centric this mechanism is. And then there's aviation. The UAE has invested quite heavily in aviation, but these airlines have been supported by government funds and regulatory infrastructure. Although claims have been made that these airlines are subsidized by the family audits, there's no doubt they benefit from lack of corporate tax availability, low-cost labor, easy access to land, and they're essentially the property of the ruling families. Even though it's said they're not, they are essentially the property of the ruling families. In combination with the aviation industry, tourism has been very important in the UAE. The UAE is trying, especially Abu Dhabi, is trying to encourage more cultural tourism with the development of the Louvre and the Guggenheim in Abu Dhabi. Another mechanism for economic diversification is industrialization. And industrialization, again, has benefited, is possible in the UAE because of low-cost energy. Without this, industrialization really wouldn't be so viable in the UAE. And as well, and the resources are all obviously from fossil fuel sales. Another important mechanism for diversification is the real estate industry. The UAE has gone quite far to establish the growth of real estate, with now properties being allowed to be purchased by non-nationals. Again, an important revenue stream. However, these real estate companies are very much part of the ruling establishment, with close connections to the ruling family. Closely tied to real estate is construction. While many of the construction companies are part of the private sector, the links to the state and land ownership and allegiance to the ruling families are quite evident. The awarding of land construction properties is primarily only possible to powerful businessmen who are linked to the ruling family. So, for example, the Al Ghurair family group, who have allegiance to the Dubai ruling family, were awarded contracts for the construction of the Burj Khalifa and the Dubai Metro. Two huge projects which wouldn't be possible without the allegiance to the Dubai ruling family. So basically, the real estate and construction rely on the property laws of the UAE. And again, the land in the UAE is essentially owned by the state, but the distinction between land owned by the state and land owned by the ruling families is very indistinct. And next there's the ports in the UAE. Again, Dubai ports is one of the first mechanisms that Sheikh Rashid introduced in Dubai, and it has revenue of $314 million and profits of $650 million. So this is an important mechanism of Dubai's economic diversification. Even though the chairman isn't a member of the ruling family, he has quite close connections with the Dubai ruling family. There's also Abu Dhabi has also come on board and developed their ports, and again, it's expected to contribute $22 billion to the economy of Abu Dhabi by 2030. Another important mechanism is free zones. So free zones are one way to attract direct foreign investment into the UAE. It started in Dubai in collaboration with Dubai ports, and it's a way to circumvent the kafala system, which means that there's 100% foreign ownership and no import tax, so no personal income tax to the owners. So again, another important mechanism. Okay, so while the UAE's efforts have been undoubtedly successful and generate significant income, it does rely on recycling of oil money and have effectively been state-led. So instead of the creation of a new revenue stream, it seems to be recycling of oil money. Okay, so essentially the private sector should be an important mechanism for economic diversification. However, they are able to act independently as they rely on the ruling elite and the patron system, which is reinforced by the ruling bargain. So the private sector is dominated by family businesses. 90% are SMEs, but because of their small size and their limited capital, the limited sectors they trade in, and exclusion from policy-making processes, they're unable to contribute significantly to diversification. So merchant families really should be the ones to make a significant effort at economic diversification. So I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide. So oil revenues are the key driver of economic activities in the UAE, and especially within the private sector, as no tax is paid to finance state expenditure from the private sector. The private sector growth leads to an increase in state resources and does not benefit the public via more public services and does not provide employment for nationals. Oil revenues allow the government the ability to make economic decisions regardless of the private sector needs. creating a subordinate relationship between the two. And this essentially hinders economic development and diversification. Now, I'm going to look very quickly at the merchant families in the UAE. Now, there are a few, there's several, but I sort of picked three ones which are listed as the three richest families in the UAE, if you exclude the ruling families. And they have significant historical links to the UAE. So certainly the Al Futtaim family are part of the Banias tribe. They were one of the main voices in the National Front in the UAE, which is a movement which opposed the rule of the ruling families in the 40s and 50s. And when oil was discovered, they were given licenses to run a lot of the important, the first trading posts in the UAE. Again, the Guer family was part of the National Front, and again, worked closely with the ruling family of Dubai. Al Fahim of Abu Dhabi, again, part of the Banias tribe, he actually married into the Banias tribe, and there was early integration with the political elite of Abu Dhabi. Okay, so there's also significant integration within the political establishment of the UAE. So the historic links of the ruling families have facilitated political integration within the ruling families. So whilst marginalised families have had less support from the government owing to their limited historical and social connections, the prominent merchant families have had a much more significant role. They've been ministers in the government, ambassadors, members and chairmen of the Federal National Council, and members of municipal councils. So the prominent role that they've played, the merchant families have played, are linked to the historic ties to the ruling families. So if we look at these three families again, if we look at the Al Futtaim family group, they've been members of the Dubai municipality, chairman of Emirates Investment Bank, board members of Dubai Chamber, directors of the banks, and members of the Federal National Council. Again, the Guer family again have been part of the Dubai municipality, members of the Executive Council, members of the Federal National Council, board members of the electricity and of the utilities. Again, quite significant roles within important political establishments within the UAE. And the Fahim family of Abu Dhabi, again, Federal National Council, members of the sovereign wealth funds, members of of important property and commercial enterprises in the UAE. So, because of their political connections within the UAE, the economic interests pretty much cover the wide range of spectrums in the UAE. In terms of the economic, which there's nowhere these families are not. So if we look at the Fahim family, they collectively own 40 companies and dominate many of the market segments of the UAE. For example, Majid Al Futtaim owns 11 shopping malls and 17 hotels. They run popular brands like IKEA, Marks and Spencer's, Carrefour, the Crown Plaza Hotel, the Sheraton Hotel. They pretty much monopolize a lot of the economic industries in the UAE, and also they have the contracts for Toyota and Lexus, and Toyota is probably the most popular car brand in the UAE. Al Guer, again, in manufacturing and financial investments, shopping malls, hotels, spitneys, huge names which are, which are very important to the UAE. The Al Fahim Group, again, operates automotives, automotive industry, many, including Mercedes-Benz. And also big shopping malls and hotels. And they're also significant in the hydrocarbon industry. Okay. So essentially, sorry, I know we're out of time. Okay.
Yes, Lorraine, if you could please wrap it up and present us some concluding remarks, so to give us an idea what you are going to make with all of this very, very interesting and fascinating information.
Okay, we're on the last slide. So, if you examination of the business activity shows that the merchant families have the potential to contribute to economic diversification. Yet, because of their integration into the political establishment and dependency on the ruling elite, reinforced by the ruling bargain and what I'm calling an economic bargain, that is exchanging economic prosperity in exchange for support of the ruling elite. This is reinforced through integration into the political apparatus of the state. So this situation has put the merchant class economically very successful, but dependent on the patronage system for their success. Hence, they are able to contribute independently to economic diversification. So this exists in parallel with the state, whose resources enable it to carry out diversification independent of the income from the merchant class or the rest of the private sector, yet provide a means for the economic prosperity of the merchant families as well as the private sector. So this system hinders the participation of the merchant class in genuine wealth creation, and hence their ability to contribute to economic diversification effectively. So essentially, the ruling bargain and an economic bargain between the merchant class and the ruling elite has reinforced the inability to contribute to economic transformations, i.e. economic diversification in the UAE. And that's it.
Thank you very much.